Good afternoon, and welcome to the Tourism, Trade, and Export Promotions Subcommittee's our fifth hearing on reviving travel and tourism economy, and our first legislative hearing. Over the past few months, members of this subcommittee and of the full Commerce Committee have been working together on a bipartisan package of travel and tourism bills, officially called the Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act, or as we prefer to call it, the Tour Bus. This comprehensive legislation will support the recovery of the travel and tourism economy in the wake of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, and help us build a brighter future for businesses and workers in this key sector for every single state in our nation. Since we held our first hearing on the state of travel and tourism industry in April of this year, there have been some positive trends. Just yesterday, the administration announced its intentions to begin lifting travel restrictions in November for fully vaccinated foreign travelers seeking to fly to the United States. This safe, practical step will provide a much-needed boost to our travel and tourism economy, supporting businesses and workers as we look to turn the corner from this pandemic. And yesterday's news is just one more sign that the travel and tourism industry appears to be in the process of recovering, but slowly. Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas saw just over 4 million visitors in July, only 8% below its July 2019 numbers. And thankfully, consumers are planning leisure travel again. Federal relief like the Paycheck Protection Program, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, well, they've helped keep businesses afloat during this very trying period. Support for tourism-heavy economies throughout the Economic Development Administration grants has also helped make this recovery possible. Widespread availability of the COVID-19 vaccine, of course, has provided the greatest stimulus, improving public health and consumer confidence. However, the travel and tourism industry, vital to every state's economy and workforces, still needs significant help. Business travel revenue is not expected to return to 2019 levels until at least 2024. There are nearly 500,000 fewer hotel jobs compared to the pre-pandemic hotel employment. And overseas arrivals in July of 2021 were nearly 78% below July 2019 levels. For numerous reasons, international travel remains virtually non-existent, and we look forward to the lifting of international travel bans. I'm happy to report, though, that help is on the way, not only focused on pandemic recovery, but also on the future growth of travel, tourism, and hospitality in years to come. We must help create and bring back good-paying jobs that depends on bringing more visitors to the U.S. and investing in the infrastructure that the travel and tourism industry desperately needs. The bipartisan bills packaged together in the Tour Bus package will create jobs and further support the recovery of the travel and tourism industry by, number one, establishing permanent leadership in the federal government on travel policies and strengthening the Department of Commerce's role in coordinating federal travel and tourism policies. Two, investing in Brand USA, the nation's public-private partnership dedicated to increasing international visitation to the United States. Number three, updating the Department of Transportation's National Travel and Tourism Infrastructure Strategic Plan to better leverage infrastructure investments to help the industry recover from the pandemic. Number four, studying innovative ways to screen airport travelers for COVID-19 and establishing a temporary joint task force among the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services to address the unique impact of COVID-19 on air travel, both during and after the pandemic. I'm proud of the work that the members of the subcommittee that we've done to build the Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act. I particularly want to thank Chair Cantwell for supporting this bipartisan effort and her team for contributing to our discussions. Ranking Member Wicker for his team's significant role in crafting the package and facilitating discussions, and Ranking Member Scott for his leadership on airport screening provisions. Senators Klobuchar, Sullivan, and Blunt for their major substantive contributions to the bill, and so many other members on this subcommittee and full committee that are leading or co-leading provisions in the draft omnibus. Senators Markey, Schatz, Sinema, and Blumenthal. I also want to thank my colleague from Nevada, Senator Cortez Masto, for her team's contribution to the development of this legislative package, and I look forward to continuing to partner with her to advance policy changes that grow Nevada's travel and tourism industry. I'm looking forward today from hearing from all of our witnesses about how we can improve our legislation before we bring it before the broader Commerce Committee for a vote and then to the Senate floor. Testifying today on the bill, we have industry experts from the U.S. Travel Association, the Global Business Travel Association, the Airports Council International, North America, and the American Hotel and Lodging Association. It is my hope that today's hearing will demonstrate why we need to pass the tour bus package and provide a forum for an engaging discussion on how to further support travel and tourism businesses and their workers as the industry recovers. Thank you all again for being here, and I look forward to hearing each of you share your experiences and expertise with us. I'll now turn it over to Ranking Member Scott for his opening statement and then introduce our witnesses. Senator Scott.
First, I want to thank Chair Rosen for hosting this hearing today. I also want to thank Chair Rosen for her team, which is very, very dedicated to growing tourism, not just in each of our states, which is important to our economy, but all across our country. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being with us and sharing their perspective. Travel and tourism are incredibly important to the American economy, every state, and that's on full display in my state, home state of Florida. Florida is home to some of the best travel destinations in the world, whether that be our beaches, our wildlife, our attractions, cruising, and more. When I was governor, we grew the number of annual tourists from 80 million tourists when I got started to the last year I was there, 126 million tourists. Creates a lot of jobs. It was a record number every year. These tourists support our small businesses, they fuel our job growth, they help increase our state's investments in the environment, transportation, public safety, and education. And I think it's true probably for Chair Rosen's home state and mine. When people come down there as tourists, they often buy a home, they don't use it, and pay all of our taxes. It's a great deal. I know this pandemic has impacted each of us differently, and we've had to adapt to a lot for our families, our businesses, and employees to stay safe. Unfortunately, the pandemic has hurt Florida's travel industry significantly. I think the same is true for especially the Las Vegas industry, much like I think the entire country. I've heard from a lot of businesses and employees in Florida that rely on tourism for their jobs, and they're facing a lot of challenges in this recovering from the pandemic. I know everybody's working hard to get our businesses reopened and get these jobs back. Florida's open for business. I know the regulations the Biden administration has proposed and the mandates related to COVID, international travel have created some uncertainty around the state of our, especially our international travel and our tourism industries. And we all have to continue to work to figure out how to do this so we get these tourists back. Our nation, as we all know, can't go back to shutdowns. We can't cripple our economy. We can't destroy our jobs again. It's impact. All these things have impacted our family, each of our families, education, everything. I got my vaccine. I think probably everybody here did. Some people have even probably gotten 3 of them. So anybody I encourage, and I think we all would do, anybody that feels comfortable getting the vaccine, I hope they get one. I've been talking to our hospital industry, and very few of the individuals that have gotten really sick in our hospitals have not had the vaccines. So I had COVID and got the vaccine, and I hope other people will do the same thing. So I'm very proud of the work that Chair Rosen has led on this subcommittee. I think it's very important to a lot of jobs, and I look forward to continue to work with the chair and getting some things done through the full committee. I've worked on a lot of bills with regard to travel. I just want to bring up a couple of them. The bipartisan Fly Safe Canine COVID Detention Act with Senator Sinema to direct TSA to conduct a feasibility study on the use of canine units, which have been reportedly effective in detecting COVID and will provide an additional layer of passenger screening. I think we all have to figure out how to get our airports better at doing screening so we don't ever have this shutdown again, because the number of jobs are lost for a period of time because of what happened with travel, either domestic or international, is just devastating. We also, I think all of us are very focused on restoring Brand USA. It's a bipartisan bill with Senators Klobuchar, Blunt, and Chair Rosen, which will make existing funds available to Brand USA to promote international travel as we recover from this COVID. So I think everybody sitting here we've all sponsored legislation that's going to help make sure we get this travel industry back. So I look forward to working with all of my colleagues to make sure that we go back to record tourism again in each of our states, because it creates a lot of jobs, good paying jobs in every one of our 50 states. Thank you, Chair Rosen.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I'm going to yield now to Senator Wicker, who's a ranking member of the full committee, for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Senator Rosen and Senator Scott, for holding this important hearing to examine legislative proposals to revive travel and tourism and create jobs. The new Tourism, Trade, and Export Promotion Subcommittee has been very active in this Congress, and I'm encouraged by the bipartisan nature of its work, and this is certainly a bipartisan issue we are talking about today. The travel and tourism industry is a vital pillar of the American economy. COVID-19 has decimated this industry perhaps more than any other sector. Nearly 40% of all U.S. jobs lost because of the pandemic were in leisure and hospitality employment. During the worst point of the crisis, unemployment in the travel and tourism sector reached over 50%, more than double the national unemployment rate at the height of the Great Depression. Congress has sought to provide much-needed relief to help this industry survive and recover, and we recognize that more support is needed. Over the past several months, our staffs and the staffs of several other members have formed a working group to examine how various pieces of bipartisan legislation could be packaged together to support our economic recovery. Their work has led to the draft of the Omnibus Tourism Act, the tour bus. I hope that becomes a byword in this Congress. The discussion draft includes provisions to study the impacts of COVID-19 on the travel and tourism industry, elevate travel and tourism matters at the Department of Commerce, promote travel to the United States, and set visitation goals for international travelers. This draft legislation has the potential to promote the travel and tourism industry and accelerate its recovery. I hope our witnesses today will update the committee on the state of travel and tourism industry and share their views on the discussion draft. It might take years to restore travel and tourism to pandemic levels, but I hope not. I'm hopeful that our work on this draft legislation will lead to a bipartisan package that will help this sector heal faster and prosper once again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Appreciate you being here today and for your comments. So we have 4 of our witnesses. Some are visiting with us virtually. And so the first witness that I'd like to introduce is U.S. Travel's Tori Emerson Barnes. We're going to welcome her back to the subcommittee. Ms. Barnes provided invaluable testimony at our inaugural subcommittee hearing back in April, and I am thankful that she's joining us again today as we develop her recommendations into legislative solutions. As the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs and Policy at U.S. Travel Association, Ms. Barnes leads the government relations, policy development, communications, marketing, and research teams for the nation's leading advocacy organization for travel and tourism issues. Ms. Barnes, you are now recognized for your opening remarks.
Chair Rosen, Ranking Member Scott, and the members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. I'm Tori Emerson Barnes, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs and Policy for the U.S. Travel Association. We are the only association that represents all sectors of the travel industry. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this important hearing. While I always prefer to meet face-to-face, I'm thrilled to be testifying virtually from Chair Rosen's hometown of Las Vegas, Nevada, where the U.S. Travel Association is hosting its annual trade show, IPW. In fact, IPW is the perfect example of why today's hearing is so important. At IPW, international travel buyers from around the globe meet with American travel businesses and destinations to purchase bookings for future travel to the United States. In 2018, travel bookings purchased at IPW generated $29 billion in international travel spending through the U.S., which supported 83,000 American jobs. This trade show demonstrates the substantial economic power of both business and international travel, 2 vital segments of the industry that are still struggling to recover. According to Tourism Economics, the domestic business spending this year is projected to be just 57% of 2019 levels, and the U.S. is projected to lose more than $200 billion in international travel spending this year. Economists project that it will take at least 4 years for these segments to be restored, and we simply can't wait that long. Thankfully, with the right policies in place as proposed by this committee, Congress can accelerate a safe return to travel and restore travel jobs. U.S. Travel has identified 3 broad areas where Congress can act. First, provide continued relief for impacted travel businesses. Second, enact stimulus measures to spur travel demand. And third, enact long-term investments and policy changes to build a stronger, more globally competitive travel industry. For continued economic relief, many small businesses and organizations are still struggling to stay afloat, particularly those that are heavily dependent on business and international travel or in regions where leisure travel has been slow to return. Congress should consider extending PPP or reform the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to provide grants to travel-dependent small businesses and enact the Save Hotel Jobs Act. To accelerate the return of business travel, meetings, conferences, and events, Congress should enact the Bipartisan Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act, which would help support business meetings and event-related travel. These tax credits alone could generate $227 billion in incremental economic activity and help restore the 2.8 million hospitality jobs that remain lost to the pandemic. Congress can also enact stimulus measures to restore international travel quickly and safely. I would like to applaud the Biden administration for its announcement that it plans to lift 212F entry restrictions in early November and replace them with a global vaccine and testing requirement for inbound international travelers. But with this announcement, the hard work now begins to make the United States the top destination in the world once again. That's why Congress must quickly enact the Restoring Brand USA Act. I'd like to thank Senators Klobuchar and Blunt for introducing the Restoring Brand USA Act, which provides one-time emergency funding of $250 million to support the organization's recovery. We strongly support the inclusion of this act in the Omnibus Tourism Act of 2021, which provides another possible pathway towards enactment. Finally, Congress must support investments and policies that can make the travel industry stronger and more globally competitive than it was before the pandemic. Congress can accomplish this by enacting the Visit America Act, which would elevate the Commerce Department's role in coordinating federal travel policies and setting long-term national strategies, establishing more senior leadership at the Department of Transportation to coordinate travel policy across all modes of transportation, enacting the one-stop security pilot program that would streamline the entry process without compromising security, and making investments in travel infrastructure to bring about a more modern, efficient, sustainable transportation network. Lastly, I'd like to thank the committee for its critical role in shaping and advancing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which will also be critical for the travel industry's recovery. From relief to stimulus to investments in the future, there's no shortage of policies that can help restore travel jobs and get Americans and our economy moving again. I'd like to thank the members of the subcommittee, including the Honorary Subcommittee Senator Blunt, for your work developing the Omnibus Tourism Act, or Tour Bus, of 2021, and we hope the bill will move through the committee soon so that we can ensure that these policies can be enacted this year. We are so grateful for your significant leadership for the travel industry, and I look forward to working with you on these solutions and welcome any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Barnes. Appreciate you being here. And now I'd like to introduce our next witness, Ms. Suzanne Neufang, CEO of the Global Business Travel Association, GBTA, the country's premier business travel and meetings trade organization. Ms. Neufang formally assumed her role as CEO earlier this year. Prior to leading GBTA, Ms. Neufang held several senior leadership roles at travel and technology companies. She's been an active member of GBTA since 2005 and led the Association of Corporate Travel Executives in various capacities between 2012 and 2018. Ms. Neufang, thank you so much for being here virtually. You're now recognized for your opening remarks.
Chairwoman Rosen, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee, I'm Suzanne Neufang, CEO of the Global Business Travel Association, or GBTA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding legislative solutions to revive travel and tourism and create jobs. GBTA, as the premier business travel and meetings trade association, is headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. GBTA serves a global network of more than 28,000 corporate travel policy professionals and over 125,000 constituents within the business travel industry. We represent an industry that in 2019 accounted for $1.9 trillion globally and $345 billion in the U.S. alone. For the last 12 years, GBTA has produced an annual business travel index, which is a comprehensive study of business travel spending and growth covering 75 countries across 48 industries. Our most recent study was released in February of 2021, and it was based on fourth quarter 2020 data. This analysis projected that the financial impact of global travel decline from the COVID-19 pandemic was expected to be 10 times that of the Great Recession or 9/11. Our forecast estimated a full global recovery in business travel no earlier than 2024, and in the US, 2025. In fact, we estimate this year's global business travel spending would be no greater than $842 billion, a loss of 40% since 2019. And focusing just within the US, business travel spend for 2021 is estimated to be less than $145 billion this year, a decline of 57%. And because this study was released in February, these estimates do not factor in the latest considerations, especially delayed restart plans due to impacts related to the Delta variant. GBTA also conducts a monthly COVID-19 recovery poll of our constituents, and our recent data shows renewed negativity in business travel sentiment within especially the past 2 months. GBTA's early summer polling showed that 61% of U.S. companies were already conducting some non-essential domestic business travel. Of those not traveling, 2/3 plan to resume domestic travel within 3 months. However, by August, that figure had fallen to 1/4 as COVID-19 cases were once again rising. As I've put forth, the business travel industry needs additional support and resources to recover. As such, GBTA supports the inclusion of the Omnibus Tourism Act of 2021 in the Build Back America plan as a positive step in restoring global business travel and meetings in the US and abroad. While there are many good policy ideas in this legislation, I will focus here on 2: the implementation and support of Visit America and needed improvements in the visa process. As restrictions on international travel ease, it will be vital for Visit America and promotion of travel to the US to inform the world that America is safe and open for business. Additionally, there is no question that the 212F restrictions on European Union, UK, and other travelers visiting the US dramatically impacted business travel. This is a policy that began in early 2020 and whose restrictions were just updated yesterday for November implementation, a very long 18 months and which we welcome ending. International companies welcome the safe reopening of the US for their business travelers and need to know that we will remain a safe destination. The Visit America program and the items related to interagency cooperation, strategic divisions on tourism, and improving safety and screening are necessary to achieve this goal. Secondly, visas, and by extension passports, are vital to business travel. Prior to COVID-19, the process for obtaining visas and passports was already strained. Now the processing time is significantly longer. We're getting reports of visa appointment availability in some countries stretching into mid-2022. Passport enabling companies are reporting to us that the Department of State standard delivery time for passports has tripled from 6 weeks pre-COVID to 4 months today. Expedited passport delivery has gone up 6-fold from 2 weeks to 3 months. So we urge the expediting of visa and passport processing times so that as business travelers return to travel and return to business, they can have the proper documentation. As we look ahead, the business travel industry is still in deep recovery mode and will be for the near future. It is important that government and business work together, mitigating risks such as by increasing vaccination uptake. One thing we do know, it's time that we get business travelers back in the skies, on trains, and on the road again, safely and responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Ms. Neufang. We appreciate you being here as well. Our next witness testifying remotely is Christopher Bidwell, Senior Vice President of Security at Airports Council International North America. ACINA. Mr. Bidwell leads ACINA's efforts on aviation security, oversees its regulatory activities, and is a subject matter expert on security policy, domestic and international aviation security, and airport regulation. He serves on several working groups and committees, including the TSA Aviation Security Advisory Committee, where he is vice chair. Mr. Bidwell is also a multi-engine, instrument-rated commercial pilot. Mr. Bidwell, you're now recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Rosen and Ranking Member Scott and members of the subcommittee. I'm Christopher Bidwell, Senior Vice President of Security at Airports Council International North America. I appreciate the invitation to participate in today's hearing. ACINA and our member airports greatly appreciate the subcommittee's interest in restoring safe and healthy travel to destinations throughout the United States. While there was an uptick in passenger volumes at airports this summer, the extended duration of the global pandemic, coupled with the rise in the Delta variant, has again caused our numbers to dip well below 2019 levels. We are experiencing a downturn in leisure travel, a delay in the return of business travel, and the continued closure of our international borders. As we look for ways to emerge from this crisis, I would like to offer the following policy solutions that would greatly assist the travel and tourism industry as we head toward a recovery. First, the most fundamental step the U.S. government can take is reopening our borders to international travel. America's airports applaud the Biden administration's announcement to allow fully vaccinated passengers to travel to the United States. This latest step responds to our request for a plan to restore international travel, which is critical to the aviation industry's economic recovery. We look forward to working with our government and industry partners to ensure a smooth implementation. Second, in order to keep security checkpoints and federal inspection stations open, operational, and safe, Congress must ensure there is a sufficient number of CBP and TSA officers, as well as technology, to support the return of international travel. We must avoid the long lines at checkpoints that create security vulnerabilities and minimize the potential for passengers and baggage to miss their connecting flights. Third, several provisions contained in the draft of the Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act would have a direct benefit to airports and the travel and tourism industry. We appreciate the inclusion of the Ensuring Health, Safety in the Skies Act, which ACINA strongly supports. A task force of federal agencies advised by federal aviation industry partners would be very helpful in developing meaningful guidelines and developing recommendations to address the challenging operational and infrastructure issues related to COVID-19 recovery and future pandemic planning. We also appreciate the inclusion of a TSA pilot program for one-stop security for international passengers connecting to domestic flights in the United States. ACINA has been a long supporter of one-stop security. Additionally, we appreciate the inclusion of provisions designed to raise the profile of travel and tourism industry within the U.S. government and to increase participation in trusted traveler programs. Although there may be some benefit from cross-training TSA canines to detect COVID-19, taking TSA canines offline for new training and certification could reduce the time that they are available to screen passengers and baggage for explosives. This raises potential security concerns. We encourage Congress and TSA to use the findings from a recently launched canine COVID-19 detection pilot at Miami International Airport to inform any similar program at TSA. Finally, one thing that has not changed during the pandemic, our airports continue to face substantial infrastructure needs. In addition to creating jobs, new investment in airports can help local communities attract air service, which increases competition and leads to lower airfares for passengers. We sincerely appreciate the $20 billion in airport infrastructure funding included in the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure bill. This one-time infusion of capital will help jumpstart new projects at airports. However, given the $115 billion in infrastructure needs at airports, as documented in ACINA's infrastructure report, Congress must find new ways to ensure funding for these much-needed improvement projects. Airports are leading economic engines in their communities and an integral part of the travel and tourism industry. ACINA and our member airports will continue to work with the subcommittee and our government and industry partners to weather this crisis so we can get Americans and international passengers traveling again through an aviation system that is stronger, safer, more secure, and more resilient than ever. Thank you for this opportunity today. I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bidwell. Again, we appreciate you being here. And now, rounding out our panel, I'd like to introduce our final witness testifying in person today. And so thankfully he's here because when you do all this traveling, you need somewhere to stay. And so Mr. Chirag Shah, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the American Hotel and Lodging Association, AHLA. Mr. Shah assumed his role at AHLA in March of this year, a critical time for the hospitality industry. Prior to joining AHLA, Mr. Shah served as Vice President of Government Affairs and Counsel at the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. He's also a member of the boards of the U.S. Travel Association, the California Hotel and Lodging Association, the Pennsylvania Restaurant Lodging Association, the Florida Restaurant Lodging Association, the South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association, the Coalition of Franchisee Associations, and the Georgia Statewide Human Trafficking Task Force. Mr. Shah, you are recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to sharing with you the hotel industry's perspective on how to revive travel and tourism and bring back our workforce in response to COVID-19. My name is Chirag Shah. I serve as a Senior Vice President at the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And for more than 100 years, AHLA has proudly represented all segments of the U.S. lodging industry, including our associates, brands, and hotel owners. For our members, what matters most is serving their guests, creating good jobs, and uplifting their communities. Senators, this is the most severe crisis in the history of the hotel industry. Without relief, we are facing catastrophic economic impacts for the entire American economy and for the communities that you represent. Here's the snapshot. Because of historically low occupancy rates, business declines are not only worse than the Great Recession, they're also worse than the Great Depression. Hotel revenues are 9 times worse than after 9/11, and the industry lost over 700,000 jobs in 2020. As vaccinations became available and summer arrived, we were hopeful for a rebound, but the uptick in travel did not last. The Delta variant is wreaking havoc. Now, over 2/3 of business travelers and half of all leisure travelers are postponing or canceling their trips. The decline in business travel alone amounts to half of all revenues and will cost the hotel industry nearly $59 billion. Revenues will be down 50%, and hotels will lose $97 billion in 2021 alone. Hotels are now bracing for another wave of hardship and staff reductions, and the worst effects are in big cities that employ the majority of our workforce and rely on conventions and events. Just last week, urban market hotels were down more than 40% in revenue compared to 2019. Our industry will not recover until 2024. The pandemic has also been devastating to the hotel workforce. 500,000 jobs that existed before the pandemic will not return this year. The data is stark compared to the rest of the national economy. While overall unemployment dropped to 5.2% in August, the accommodations sector remained at 14.5%, nearly 3 times the national average. The pandemic has eliminated a decade of job growth in the hotel industry. Our industry is also experiencing a critical staffing shortage. Many laid off and furloughed employees found other jobs or moved away last year. As hoteliers seek to rebuild, they cannot find enough workers despite increasing compensation and offering additional benefits. Needing staff while also enduring historically low occupancy rates is one of the cruel ironies inflicted by this pandemic. The road to recovery for our industry remains long. However, successful efforts in Congress to restore travel and tourism will be a catalyst for expansive economic development. We're grateful for this committee's efforts on the Omnibus Tourism Act, or the Tour Bus, which will provide vital funding for infrastructure for our beleaguered economy and as we continue towards recovery. Visit America will bring back international visitors. In 2020, international travel fell by 76%, and we welcome Congress's goal to see 116 million visitors who spend $445 billion per year by 2032. This sends a message that America will be open for business when travel returns. The bill also establishes a new Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Travel and Tourism. As a presidential appointee requiring Senate confirmation, the role will command considerable authority to promote travel and tourism, develop critical infrastructure, and marshal resources. The tour bus will also enable Brand USA to access $250 million previously collected for American travel promotion. And this discussion could not come at a more appropriate time with the Biden administration's announcement just yesterday, easing travel restrictions for overseas travelers beginning this November. Marketing is the greatest tool to reclaim America's share of travelers, and a strong Brand USA will reestablish the United States as a premier travel destination and shorten the time for our recovery. We also appreciate the foresight for streamlining security protocols for air travelers and limiting burdens and easing the travel experience. This will put more heads in beds at America's hotels. In addition to the important measures included in the tour bus, we urge support of direct relief for the lodging industry. Despite being the hardest hit by the crisis, hotels are the only segment of the hospitality sector yet to receive direct COVID-related aid. The Save Hotel Jobs Act would provide 3 months of payroll and benefits for the most severely impacted hotels. Congress can also significantly jumpstart travel by passing the Hospitality and Commerce Job Recovery Act. Tax incentives will motivate businesses to contract for conventions, trade shows, and large group events, which often take nearly a year to plan. Passage of this bill would drive travel demand and support millions of jobs and small businesses. Chair Rosen and Ranking Member Scott, thank you for the opportunity to share the impact of COVID-19 on the hotel industry with you today. Congress can take significant action to accelerate the recovery and soften the scars left by the pandemic. America's hotel industry looks forward to working with you to revive travel and tourism together. Thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Mr. Shah. And again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining today and for their thoughtful opening statements. I'm now going to defer to the ranking member of our full committee, Senator Wicker, for his first round of questioning.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And you're right. The testimony has been very helpful and very good. I appreciate it. I think I'll start with Ms. Neufang, because I know if my colleagues have experienced what we have in our office, there's this huge problem with the delay in passports and visas. So I appreciate Ms. Neufang mentioning this on page 3 of her testimony, where she mentions visas and, by extension, passports are vital. And I just wondered if you, Ms. Neufang, or any other members of the panel can pinpoint, I know this was already slow, but now it's gotten slower even as we've had fewer tourists. So why is that? Is it that people are working from home? Is it less convenient to do it that way? Would it be better if we got them back to the offices? I just would appreciate some assistance in understanding why, at a time when there are fewer applicants, the process for passports and visas is slower. You want to start, Ms. Neufang?
Yes, thank you, Senator Wicker. So our view is that part of the problem is that the hand carry program has been shuttered indefinitely, and for business travelers especially, this is important, and it didn't make sense even after passport services were resumed last summer. So this is the program used by U.S. business travelers who need to obtain passports quickly. So based on historical application data and the shortfall of applications received in 2020 due to the global COVID shutdown and travel restrictions, not only is there a lag now, but there is also an anticipation of some 30 million more passport applications coming between now and the end of the year. And we expect 30% of those to actually be business travelers. So we ask that Congress work with the State Department to resume that program of hand carry, to work with passport service companies to solve some of that backlog within the passport development and delivery program.
That takes nothing more than a decision by the department. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
That would be my understanding, but I would love the feedback of the committee and other witnesses as well for that. But that
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
Senator, this is Tori Barnes with U.S. Travel. I would just also note that with regard to the visa processing, The consulate offices across the globe have largely been closed, and that's been a negative contributing factor to the processing of visas as well. So we'd love to see a reopening of those and an expedition of the visas, because if we don't start now, as we start to welcome these international travelers back in November, we're going to have a lot of challenges in actually getting those folks here to the United States. So we would urge a quick expedition of those visas with regards to the State Department now.
Okay, and I certainly hope that people are listening in the State Department to that. While we've got you, you want to talk about how helpful the one-stop security program would be, and how it would not sacrifice safety protocols at all.
Sure. So the pilot program would allow for not more than 10 airports to be able to have a system in place to at least just pilot the safe, seamless type of environment for baggage. So right now, when you so let's say you're coming from Paris to Dulles International, you would have to check your luggage, and if you were going on to Kansas City, you'd have to take out your luggage, you'd have to have it be screened, you'd have to go back through security. It's a very cumbersome process, and it is definitely a deterrent to helping international travelers get to some of these other destinations. So a pilot program that would allow the luggage to kind of go through from the point of departure, so from Paris in this example, all the way to Kansas City, would not only enable a better facilitation process, but it would also allow for the TSA agents in NIAD at this point to focus more on the domestic passengers that they need to focus on. So it would really streamline the process, create a better facilitation, and make for much happier passengers.
Thank you. I think you stated a very good case for that. Perhaps other members of the panel can supplement their answer to the same question on the record. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. I appreciate everyone being here. And of course, we want to bring back visitors. We want to increase travel spending, and we want to create jobs. And so according to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, July 2021 was the strongest month for visitation to Southern Nevada since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 3 million people visited the Las Vegas Valley, Laughlin, and Mesquite in July of this year. However, it's still about 10% below the visitation numbers from July 2019, and the low numbers are slowly recovering our economy. Nevada's unemployment rate still close to 8%, more than twice the 3.7% rate we had the month before the pandemic began, and all this due in large part to a drop in visitors and travel spending. So, Ms. Barnes, according to data from U.S. Travel, nationwide travel spending in July of 2021 was about $98.5 billion, which was a drop of about 6.5% below those July of 2019 levels, of course, in line with the decrease in visitation. So how can the tourism legislation that we're putting together here in this omnibus bill, the tour bus, how does it help improve these numbers? What more would you like to see in this bill before we bring it to the full committee to create those good paying jobs and raise travel and tourism to pre-pandemic levels?
Sure, thank you for the question. So in the near term, it would provide emergency funding for Brand USA, which would obviously help to accelerate the return of international inbound travel. Second, in the medium term, the bill would really focus on federal tourism policymaking to ensure that there are strategic plans, national goals, and coordinated policies in place to restore travel. It would also help to reduce visa wait times, to improve customs and entry experience, and make strategic investments in travel infrastructure. In terms of what we could additionally include, we really think that the opportunity to expand the role of the Assistant Secretary to facilitate U.S. bids to bring in international conferences and events and help develop policies to grow the travel workforce are absolutely critical. For example, large conferences and sporting events generate significant export spending, and $29 billion in export spending generated by IPW in 2018 that I noted earlier is the equivalent of the export of 69 Boeing 747s. So the travel as an export is a significant, critically economic driver here in the United States. Travel jobs also provide a pathway from a workforce standpoint to the middle class, and many travel businesses can't find or restore workers. So ensuring that there are federal policies to support the long-term and temporary workforce needs to also be a major focus. And then lastly, supporting other measures outside the committee's jurisdiction, like the Hospitality, Commerce, and Jobs Recovery Act, would help to accelerate business travel recovery as well.
Thank you. I'd like to just quickly move on to the tour bus impact on airports. Of course, our Harry Reid International Airport, at one point we had about 50 million visitors a year, and now this last July we had 4.1 million visitors. And we're nearing pre-pandemic passenger volume, but we have to improve that. And so, Mr. Bidwell, how can the meaningful guidelines that were set forth in this legislation help with the airports, and how can strategic infrastructure investments improving our airports, also addressed in our omnibus bill, help revive the travel and tourism economy in the wake of the pandemic?
Thank you, Chair Rosen. Airports have experienced a host of operational challenges, particularly during the pandemic. They have needed flexibility in implementing and complying with security requirements. And we sincerely appreciate our TSA partners for working with airports to provide such flexibility. And it greatly assists airports when requirements are outcome focused as opposed to overly prescriptive. In terms of infrastructure, our airports continue to face substantial infrastructure needs to replace or upgrade aging terminals, gates, security checkpoints, and ramps, and other things. Inadequate infrastructure at our airports fails to meet the growing needs of local businesses and tourists. And this jeopardizes the economic recovery of American cities, states, and regions. And I would just mention that in March 2021, we released an infrastructure report detailing more than $115 billion in infrastructure needs at airports over the next 5 years. As I noted, the task force of federal agencies advised by aviation industry partners established by the Ensuring Health, Safety in the Skies Act will help by requiring a coordinated plan so we are better prepared to address the challenges of the recovery and have a roadmap for future pandemics.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Scott for his first round of questions.
Thank you, Chair Rosen. The travel and tourism industry in Florida and all across our nation has been facing historic labor shortages. Can each of you talk about what you think the reason is in your industry and what your industries are doing to mitigate this ongoing issue? So, Ms. Barnes, you want to start?
I was going to say, I'm happy to start. Thank you. Obviously, we've had a workforce shortage that actually started before the pandemic. There were already some challenges that we were facing, but given the pandemic and sort of the frontline worker aspect of the virus, we have seen, and the unfortunate, stay-at-home orders that we had at the beginning of the pandemic and the challenges that travel businesses faced. A lot of, we lost, accounted for 65% of pandemic-related unemployment. And a lot of those folks moved on to other jobs. They were either able to find jobs, or in some cases, maybe they've left the workforce altogether. So we need to undergo an extensive reconnaissance of what we can do to better attract the labor back to our industry so that they understand that these are good jobs, that we can have a significant upward mobility. And we are in the process of doing that because we know that there are so many great benefits from being in this industry and so many opportunities for growth. Additionally, we really need these jobs, right? We've got hotels that have floors of hotels, of rooms that they can't clean, so they can't have folks stay in those rooms, which hurts their revenue. We've got destinations that are because of business travel and international being so insecure right now, challenges with getting folks back because of the lack of certainty. So we're really looking to dig in to bring these workers back, and we're going to really put forward a campaign to encourage folks back to our workforce. So a lot needs to be done, and I think that's why some of this incentives to help to get more folks traveling, get business travel back, and get international travel back in a robust way will help to give security for folks to come back into this workforce.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw?
With labor have been across the board, and it's unfortunate because at certain times you need to be able to have enough people in the hotel, both during leisure time as well as during business time, as you know well in Florida. And so the best thing that we can do is drive up business travel. As I mentioned, in the urban markets in particular, we're losing so much of our workforce because we just don't have the business. And so tax incentives to get people traveling, to restore conventions and conferences would be extremely critical. But some of the other things that are important in our industry in trying to attract workers back, folks have increased the compensation, increased benefits, things along those lines. But we're still seeing some challenges for the industry. The American Hotel and Lodging Association has put forth a program called Hotels Are Hiring. And what the point of the program is to do is to make sure that we're training folks. We're providing them with $1 million in academic and training scholarships to make sure that folks are ready for this particular workforce, for this new type of labor that we're expecting. And so the industry has faced a number of challenges, but we're optimistic that if Congress can put forth motivations to drive more people into our hotels, that we'll have a ready workforce at that time.
Thank you. Ms. Neufang?
Yes, from my perspective, I could say that about 1/8 of our members became honorary members during the pandemic, meaning they lost their jobs and we gave them honorary membership in our association. That's probably indicative across the board of supply side and to a lesser extent, the buy side. Most companies did keep their policy decision makers on staff for what their travel would become. This was primarily a supply side effect of the pandemic and the uneven effect of international, especially international inbound restrictions and where we were able to go but not come back. That affected us profoundly. I think the other piece that certainly is something to consider in driving the demand that the other witnesses have talked about is offices do need to reopen. For offices to reopen gives that place for a meeting to happen, and that drives so much travel within the business travel industry. You travel to meet, you don't travel in business for esoteric reasons. So that meeting location is so very important. And I think the benefits that come for helping either hospitality industry or the meetings and conferences industry, as well as ultimately that workforce and the place where they work, opening up those offices again means that they have a place to meet again. And ultimately that will drive business travel back on a normal sphere as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bidwell?
Thank you for the question. The hiring challenges are not just limited to airports, as you noted. TSA is also experiencing challenges in hiring transportation security officers. To respond to the challenges, airports have held job fairs, which have proved successful, and some airports have also provided incentives.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Rosen.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Senator Klobuchar.
Hey, thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you, Senator Scott, as well. So I'm over at Judiciary where we're having another hearing I'm chairing, but I wanted to be on. I think you know how much I care about this. Inbound international travel has historically been the nation's second largest industry export before the pandemic. As we know, we saw a 91% decrease in international visitors since the pandemic. And Senator Blunt and I have long led the bipartisan legislation to continue the funding of Brand USA, to restore some of the funding, and I appreciate the work that all my colleagues have been doing on this. And Ms. Barnes, I guess I would start with you. Our bill would direct the Secretary of Treasury to temporarily allow the Department of Commerce to access critical funding to help fund Brand USA next year. As the travel industry starts to rebound, the recent announcement of allowing international travelers in with vaccinations. Can you speak to the importance of restoring Brand USA?
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you for the question and for your significant leadership on this important issue. I think one of the benefits of Brand USA is really that it's been funded without American taxpayer dollars, and the solution that you all have found would enable that to continue. Investments in Brand USA provide a 25-to-1 return on investment, so we know that the dollars would be put to good use. And as you noted, the decline in international inbound has been so significant for such a long period of time, for 18 months, that if we're going to be the number one country, the number one destination of the future, we absolutely need Brand USA to accelerate their work and to be able to invite international travelers back to the U.S. So incredibly.
I would think it would be especially timely because you want to invite a new group back in, some of whom haven't been traveling for a while. We always have the problem that we have competitors advertising. And until we had Brand USA, as you know, we were really hamstrung about what we could do. So as you talked, it made me realize the moment matters. As people start traveling again, we want them to remember to come to our country, where they spend an average of how much, Ms. Barnes?
An average of $4,000 per international visitor. And so,
The Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota.
Exactly. Shopping is important.
I have another question on the recent announcement was great, and maybe this could go to, I think maybe you, Mr. Shah, about people flying in and the vaccinations. We're all happy about that. There is still a strange situation on my border, the Canadian border, where we were happy. I worked really hard on this as head of the American Canadian Interparliamentarian Group to get Minnesotans and Americans can now, with the vaccination, travel to Canada. They can see their loved ones, they stay in their hotels, blah, 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 blah. Well, now they can fly to America, the Canadians, who have an over 80% vaccination rate, but they can't drive. And I was thinking of you, Mr. Shah, because especially from a hotel perspective, this is a problem because you can fly to Florida from Montreal, but you can't drive from Thunder Bay, Canada to Duluth. And so you can imagine all the border states would like the Biden administration to change that. I'm hopeful they will soon, but there's a group of us on the border really advocating for that change, especially when their vaccination rate is higher than ours. Could you comment, Mr. Shah?
Appreciate that, and as somebody who grew up in Wisconsin, right next door, definitely understand the proximity and the frustration, especially where if you can fly but you can't drive across. In some cases, could take hours versus just a couple of minutes to come across the border. And so we're hoping with opening up of the travel restrictions from the administration, we'll be in a better position. But I tell you, the most important thing that we can do for the hotel industry right now is to pass the Save Hotel Jobs Act. This is such a critical provision that would provide payroll and benefits to hotel employees so they're able to make it across until travel resumes. So definitely understand the challenges that we're facing, but hopefully this will help protect the hotel industry soon.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll put the rest of my questions for the other witnesses on the record, and thank you very much, Madam Chair.
So thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Next, I'd like to recognize Senator Blunt.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I didn't expect to be recognized quite that quickly. I will say, as I would have anticipated, Senator Klobuchar asked a number of the questions I was going to ask, and we have worked closely on these issues for a long time. I do hope that the Brand USA solution that we're collectively proposing gets us back in the competition for foreign travelers. They're important to us. I think clearly they're also important not just to our economy, but to our relationships around the world. It is in so many ways our best diplomatic effort to have people come here, and they almost always like us better when they leave than they thought they would, even if they thought they'd like us a lot when they got here. And so that's all good. I would say another thing that Senator Klobuchar and I have asked the administration to do through the Department of Commerce is to study the report on the effects that COVID-19 have had on the travel and tourism industry, really to be sure that we know what we're doing as we move forward. I think maybe I'd pose to every person on the panel, starting with Mr. Shaw, beyond the economic impact, which I think we have will clearly be in the report. What's another thing or two, Mr. Shaw, that you'd like to see in this report as it relates to travel and tourism, and particularly your industry, maybe something you wouldn't have anticipated at the beginning of COVID-19 that now is obviously one of the ongoing challenges because of COVID-19?
Appreciate the question. As a Mizzou grad, I appreciate your leadership on so many travel and tourism issues during your tenure in the Senate. For our industry, as we're looking, and appreciate in the tour bus the provision for the study. There's so many issues that the industry is facing that we didn't anticipate, as you mentioned, but predominantly the impact on jobs. So first and foremost, of course, what is happening and the uneven nature of the recovery for our industry is really challenging because you can't anticipate when we're going to be able to have a steady stream of visitors come back and a steady stream of guests and people coming and visiting our hotels. So making sure that we understand the trajectory of the pandemic relative to jobs, and that's why the Save Hotel Jobs is so critical. The other piece is on tax revenues. The implications of taxes for America's hotels on the local communities in which they serve are absolutely critical. From, of course, federal taxes, but to property taxes, to sales taxes, all of the taxes that folks have to pay, but they help uplift local communities, of course, in doing so. The challenges that we're going to see if there is all of a sudden a wave of foreclosures, for instance, within the hotel industry, because we don't have enough guests for folks to be able to meet their mortgage obligations. Things along those lines are going to be a big challenge. And because the trajectory for our industry won't be until 2024, recovery won't be until 2024, there's still a long way to go. So we'd encourage you to take a look into both of those areas.
Thank you. Ms. Barnes?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, as always, for your tremendous leadership of Brand USA and all issues on the travel industry. I think another thing really to look at is, as we look at the future of transportation and travel mobility, how some of the sustainability related issues will impact our industry. Before we entered the pandemic, we were having in some areas a sort of an over-tourism issue, and we were looking to try to make sure that we were encouraging folks to look at other related destinations when they would come to a city, for example. I think as well as we look at the way the auto industry, for example, has set robust goals for electric vehicle infrastructure and electric vehicle targets of having all electric fleets by 2035, that's going to change the way that folks drive across the country and the destinations that they're able to go to. And so I think that it's really important that we think about the long-term viability of the industry and the critical infrastructure needs that we will have over the next several decades. So I think that that's something, along with the items that Chirag mentioned. The workforce piece is obviously another really critical issue, but I think we need to be thinking long-term about where and how the industry is going to change and how we can be prepared to welcome folks both domestically and internationally for the long term.
Thank you. And what about airport security issues, other security issues, and really other airport issues that you'd like to see looked at, Mr. Bidwell, in the report we've asked for?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. One of the things I think we need to consider is that measures, to the greatest extent possible, are targeted and based on science. As an example, the point that Senator Klobuchar mentioned about the closure of the northern border, many Canadians drive to the United States to then fly out of airports close to the border because it is beneficial for them. And the other thing that I would say is that we need to consider all the measures that the aviation industry has implemented to provide for the safety, security, and health of the traveling public. And then last, I would just reiterate a point that I made previously during my opening remarks about the need to ensure ample funding and the appropriate number of transportation security officers and Customs and Border Protection officers to keep pace with the growth in travel and anticipated growth in international travel. And I would note that technology particularly screening technology plays a key component in that.
Right. Well, that's a good point. I actually was going to ask the question about the border too, and I'm not sure I would have thought about the importance of access to those airports in our country close to the border. That's a really good point. I think I would have pointed out that I could make the argument, I believe, that for vaccinated people, probably safer to come across in your own car than it is to get in groups of people, not to discourage air travel. We all know we all do that and understand it and appreciate it and couldn't live without it. But it seemed to me an unreasonable line to draw that you could fly in, but you couldn't drive in from our neighbor and our important trading partner. Ms. Neufang, from just global business travel generally, what do you think, what would you like to see in a commerce report that looks at what we've been through and makes recommendations about the future?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with Ms. Barnes on the sustainability issue. I think workplaces and CFOs, as well as CEOs and their HR departments, have woken up to the sustainability issue, sometimes using sustainability as their excuse not to be traveling again. So we need government help to support the kinds of sustainable actions around sustainable aviation fuel support or benefits, ground transportation options that are sustainable in urban centers to get those meetings back to where those urban centers are hurting the most. The second area is around work culture itself. I think there is a lot of study left to be done on the number of people that started jobs without ever having met their counterparts and leaving those jobs during this pandemic without ever having met a single person in their company, and how workplace culture and the travel, the commute, the pieces that are part of it, coming together to meet, to get work done is a primary function of humanity, and a way that we need to understand what, and if any, long-lasting effects those are, and who comes back first. What are their advantages when it comes to commerce and the way that they do their business? And finally, I would say this is, at least from what we read in many of the media outlets these days, will not be the last pandemic that we deal with in our lifetimes. And so what did we do well in the last 18 months? What could we have done better? And how can we get in front of, especially cross-border policy, cooperation, and consistency to make sure that we are approaching the next pandemic with as many tools as we have available, and making those policies set up so that there is less confusion and less inconsistency in the way that we process, whether it's ground border crossings or air travel into other borders in the future. So those would be three on my wish list.
Well, thank you. We'll be sure that the people putting this study together have all of that input, and it's very helpful, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Next, I'd like you to recognize, asking your questions remotely, Senator Sinema.
Oh, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Tourism represents such an important industry for my home state of Arizona, and in 2019, Arizona's tourism industry welcomed more than 46 million overnight visitors. That generated over $25 billion in direct travel spending, and it helped support state and local government revenue. The COVID-19 pandemic has created difficult challenges for many Arizona communities, small business owners, and Arizonans who work in the tourism industry. In 2020, spending by domestic and international travelers declined by 41%, hurting many local businesses and putting many Arizonans out of work. And according to the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, COVID-19 has wiped out 10 years of job growth for Arizona tourism. And unfortunately, we're not out of the woods yet, as increasing COVID case numbers are driven by the Delta variant. The Arizona Office of Tourism reports that tourism spending through July 2021 is down $4.5 billion compared to the same period in 2019. Given these significant challenges for Arizonans, I'll continue to work with my colleagues on this subcommittee to develop bipartisan solutions to these issues and help get Arizona's tourism industry back to work. Now, my first question is for Ms. Neufang. Arizona is a prime destination for large business and group travel, and according to the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, business and group travel accounts for more than half of our annual hotel revenue. And according to Visit Tucson, since March 2020, the Tucson area has had 149 meetings canceled. That resulted in a $48 million loss in economic impact throughout the region. Now, Visit Phoenix estimates the decline in business travel resulted in over $950 million in lost spending. Estimates show that business travel may not return to pre-pandemic levels until 2024, and Arizonans are seeing that trend. Just last week, Phoenix had 3 large conventions scheduled for this fall cancel all in one day. So can you describe why business and group travel is so important to the tourism industry and how the decline in this type of travel hurts Arizona's small businesses?
Thank you, Senator Sinema, for that question. And my heart goes out to the communities of Tucson and Phoenix for what is, it's certainly a devastating impact of this virus. We are holding our own convention in the great state of Florida in Orlando in November, and we get questions every day. Are you still holding it? Are you still holding it? So the impact of COVID from a $1.4 trillion business travel global industry with losses in the 50% range. On the US basis, it's a loss of 57%. As we've gone from a high. We were the largest traveling entity in the world as US, domestically and outbound. We became one of the ones highly impacted because of the surge and the resurge of the virus. We were actually on a great trajectory in May and June and the beginning of July, where we were seeing in our polling that more companies were coming back to travel domestically in particular. But what we see now, for example, is that 78% of companies polled just 3 weeks ago have still stopped all international travel for their companies, and only 18% with the current state of Delta variant we're planning to restart that in the next 3 months. So there's a long hill to climb. There are companies I speak to who are actually eager to get back on the road again. Certain types of travel will be back on the road again. And what we need to do, both as government and as industry, we need to celebrate the conferences and large meetings that come off without a hitch. And my board and I are speaking about that as we speak. We know that lots of convention centers are indeed putting on very safe conferences, and hotels are putting on large conferences of 200 to 800 people, all with the mitigations that we need to have. And I think we need to celebrate that return and the safety that we are showing as an industry on how to have a safe meeting and how to carry that forward to stop the panic, because we see some panic at the moment and we would really like to calm that down again.
Well, thank you. My next question is for Mr. Shah. You know, home to 22 National Park Service sites, including the Grand Canyon National Park, it's no surprise that many leisure travelers chose to visit Arizona. In 2019, these visitors supported over 300,000 jobs. Now, your organization reports the recent increase in the number of COVID cases nationwide is discouraging leisure travelers from taking trips, with 55% of respondents reporting they're likely to postpone travel and 42% stating they don't plan to reschedule their postponed trips. So how are Arizona hotels, restaurants, and other small businesses that cater to tourists affected when leisure travelers opt not to take their trips? And does this compound the effects felt by the decline in business and group travel?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Appreciate the question. Absolutely. The uncertainty around the trajectory of the virus, but also the responses and whether or not people are going to gather really lends to this. So as far as leisure travelers, because people are uncertain as to whether or not they feel comfortable with travel, that it's one of the biggest challenges. That's why half of all leisure travelers are starting to postpone or cancel trips. And that's compounding the issue with business travelers, as there's so much uncertainty. You saw with business travel, a number of companies decided that they were going to move back when they were going to come back to work. And that's become even more indefinite. We've also seen this, frankly, from various units of government as well. There isn't a consistent response from the federal government to state governments to local governments. And so it's very difficult for any entity to really put out a mark and follow that guideline. And so once there is additional certainty between that will drive up confidence as far as whether folks will be out and able to travel. But that, again, the impact goes back to the jobs in the lodging industry. And because of that uncertainty, because you can't have guests 7 days a week, it's very difficult to have a workforce that's there and provide them with enough work to do for those 7 days. And that's why we're asking for Congress's help to bridge that gap until travel returns. And that's why we're asking them to pass the Save Hotel Jobs Act.
Well, thank you. You know, my next question is for Mr. Bidwell. Before the pandemic, we saw record levels of airline passenger traffic, which put pressure on our existing infrastructure. This increased demand highlighted the need to improve runways and taxiways, terminals, and air traffic control towers to prevent overcrowding and delays. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act legislation I introduced in the United States Senate included $25 billion for our nation's airports. This will help airports upgrade their runways and taxiways, as well as their terminals and air traffic control facilities. As airports continue to respond to the challenges of the COVID pandemic, why is this infrastructure funding so important for both our large and smaller airports in Arizona?
Senator, thank you very much for the question. Our airports continue to face substantial infrastructure needs. In March, ACINA released an infrastructure report detailing more than $115 billion in infrastructure needs at airports over the next 5 years, and this includes $2 billion in Arizona. The important thing to note is, coupled with the current debt burden of nearly $90 billion from past projects, the report shows that our airports are falling further behind in their efforts to upgrade their facilities and improve the overall experience for their customers. We're very grateful for your work and the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure bill, which includes $20 billion in new funding over the next 5 years for airports. This funding has broad flexibility to address a variety of the projects that are needed that you mentioned. But we really need to look at the longer term after this one-time capital infusion takes effect, and plan for consistent funding to ensure airports have the ability to pay for infrastructure projects going forward. And we certainly look forward to working with you and other members of the committee on that long-term effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I apologize. I just noticed that my time has expired, and I want to thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'd just like to build a little bit upon right now upon what everyone's been talking about: conferences, convention, business travel. I don't have to tell anybody about the great conferences and conventions we have in Las Vegas, some of the most greatest conventions in the world. Of course, Ranking Member Scott and I, we have a lot of competition there, and all the conventions are great. Whatever city they are in, our communities need them, because that spending on business travel in 2019 was over approximately $334 billion. As we learned from Ms. Neufang's testimony, of course, and I don't have to tell it, I don't need any statistics, business travel is down, and conventions are down, and there is uncertainty out there. Senator Sullivan, he has the Visit America Act, of which I'm a proud co-sponsor, would help address this problem by creating an assistant secretary position within the Department of Commerce that would be focused on bolstering America's travel and tourism industry and coordinating strategies across multiple federal agencies. And so, Ms. Neufang, would you talk about the impact that creating this assistant secretary position could have on travel, and particularly the business and convention travel? As Mr. Shah spoke to, we need that reliability. Those are those midweek travelers, right? That keep the hotels open during the week for our leisure travelers to come on the weekend. So, Ms. Neufang.
Indeed. Thank you, Senator Rosen. The crux of the matter is we very much support that. With yesterday's announcement of the ending of the travel ban on certain travelers to the U.S., it really becomes even more important that our messaging across the board be cohesive, be consistent. Travelers need that one-stop shop from messaging in order to understand what travel requirements are and whether borders are open and how they are open. So the creation of an assistant secretary position will allow for that greater cross-agency, cross-industry, and other cross-business collaboration to ensure travelers have the information they need to resume their travels to the U.S. I also just referred to safe conventions and being able to crow a bit about how safe they actually are. And I think this office would actually help with that cohesive message. Additionally, it's also important for that office to set and pursue goals to increase international inbound travel into the U.S. This is a daunting task in the current environment, come from a screeching halt to go to business as usual again, but having an office like this within the administration to pursue this is vital to our success, in my opinion.
Thank you. I have one more question, and I'm going to yield to Senator Scott, but I want to talk about travel and tourism at the Department of Transportation. I know some of you here today have talked about coming to a meeting. How do you get there? Do you drive there? If you come in an airport, what's the transportation to get to where you need? And of course, the Senate passed an infrastructure bill, which includes my bill to update the National Travel and Tourism Strategic Plan from the Department of Transportation to consider the impacts of COVID-19, but we also want to lay out infrastructure investments that we need to help our tourism industry, fixing our interstates, mass transit, trains, a tour bus, our bill's called the tour bus, but we have a robust tour bus industry, rail service options, like I said, ports for the state of Florida. And Ms. Barnes, again, would you speak to the need of this kind of focus by the department in infrastructure investment to really how good that would be for the industry? And if you want to speak a little bit about the anything you know about in the infrastructure bill that we just passed that would really be beneficial to the tourism industry.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for your leadership there. We really do believe that it's critical. We have, a national program to move freight, but we don't have a national program to actually move people, and that's what the work that in provisions that were included in that bipartisan infrastructure package would do. I think establishing a chief travel and tourism officer at the Department of Transportation will really help ensure that travel-related projects are competitive to receive federal funds. And again, we need that collaboration, that cross-agency cooperation that was obviously noted in the Travel America Act, but by having a leadership role at the Department of Transportation as well, and really prioritizing the way that we look at the travel industry and how we get around is really, really critical. We talked a little bit about how, domestic travel is doing better, and this is really, we focused on business travel and international, and domestic can't prop up business and international. We need a comprehensive way to look at all of these different segments that are so critical to the whole of our industry, and they're all vital to being able to return and accelerate a recovery. So if we want to be able to recover sooner than the next 4 or 5 years, we need these types of programs in place and this type of leadership at the top of these agencies. And your legislation and the work that you all have done would really enable us to expedite those critical programs.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chair Rosen. Mr. Bidwell, I was surprised to hear how big the number is as far as infrastructure needs our airport industry has. I guess there's different ways to pay for it. We can either have the user pay for it, the flying public, business our consumers. We could have the local community, which gets the benefit out of a robust airport system, or we can have the federal taxpayers pay for it that would allocate it among users and non-users. What would you recommend would be the best way to fund infrastructure for our airports?
Senator, thank you very much for the question. One of the things that we have been very supportive of as a potential solution to help address this challenging issue of the need for funding to support infrastructure projects at airports is to modernize the passenger security fee. These are fees that are collected locally by users of the system, and they are also used locally to invest in these types of infrastructure projects that benefit travelers at those local airports, whether it's expanding security checkpoints or doing some of the projects that Senator Sinema mentioned earlier. A modernized passenger facility charge would go a long way to addressing the challenge that we have in identifying available funding to support infrastructure projects.
Can Can each airport decide what the passenger fee is for that airport?
Now, the passenger facility charge has been capped by Congress for years and is in great need of modernization. In deciding how that funding, when collected, is allocated, it's really a coordinated effort between the Federal Aviation Administration, and the airlines also have input on the projects that it is allocated toward.
So if the Orlando airport or the Las Vegas airport wanted to have a separate fee to modernize their airport, they don't have the ability to do that?
They don't have the ability to impose a user fee similar to the passenger facility charge. I mean, they collect money from, or revenue from, other things, but that has been significantly diminished as a result of the pandemic. Whether it's concessions revenue or revenue from parking or other things of that nature, it's down significantly right now, which is why finding other sources such as modernizing the passenger facility charge is so critical.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Rosen.
Well, thank you. We were trying to wait for Senator Blackburn, but I'm not sure she's going to be able to make it with us, so we will have her submit her questions for the record. So I want to thank everyone so much for participating in today's hearing. I'm looking forward to working with Ranking Member Scott, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Wicker, and all the members of the subcommittee to use what we've learned today to finalize our bipartisan omnibus tourism legislation so that we can bring it before the full committee for a vote. Today's hearing was a great step in that direction. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks until Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the American Society of Travel Advisors, and I guess I get to prove that for myself as well. Any senators, of course, that wish to submit questions for the record or anything else should do so by Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. For those of you who testified today, we ask that your responses be returned to the committee as quickly as possible and in no case later than 2 weeks after receipt. That concludes today's hearing.